All right, we'll call the Senate back to order. Secretary will read Senate Bill 416.
Senate Bill 416 by Senator Cowsitter, the 46 and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 3 of Title 35 of the OCGA relating to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation so as to establish the Georgia Information Sharing and Analysis Center within the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, to provide for a fusion center for the sharing and analysis of Homeland Security activity information, to provide for definitions, to provide for operation and responsibilities, to provide for membership, to amend Code Section 38-3-20 of the OCGA relating to Georgia Emergency Management Agency created and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Public Safety recommends that this bill do pass, respectfully submitted by Senator Harper, the 7th.
Just read down to here. We have 3 amendments.
Mr. President, Senator Cowsitter, the 46th, offers the following amendment number 1 to Senate Bill 416 by replacing lines 70 through 80 with the following. The director, subject to the direction and control of the governor, shall be the executive head of the Georgia Emergency Management Agency and shall be responsible to the governor for carrying out the program for emergency management in this state. Mr. President, Senator Cowsitter, the 46th, offers the following amendment number 2 to Senate Bill 416 by replacing lines 25 through 28 with the following: a hostile military or parliamentary action or an extraordinary law enforcement emergency.
You can read the whole thing. Just kind of blow through it.
Okay.
As best you
Mr. President, Senator Cowsitter, the 46th, offers the following amendment 2A to amendment number 2 to Senate Bill 416 by inserting after the word "of" on line 6 of amendment the following: the Director of Emergency Management, the Commissioner of Public Safety, the Commissioner of Natural Resources, the Commissioner of the State Fire Marshal, the Attorney General, the Adjunct General, and. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes Senator on the 46th to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I bring to you today Senate Bill 416, and this is a codification of efforts that the state of Georgia has taken in our anti-terrorism and anti-crime fighting efforts over the years. After 9/11 took place, it was really one of the first significant foreign attacks on our soil. Governor Roy Barnes, by executive order, created the Georgia Information Sharing and Analysis Center. That's colloquially referred to as GSAC. It's a collaborative effort between federal law enforcement such as FBI and Homeland Security, state law enforcement agencies, and also our local law enforcement agencies to respond to various threats. That is referenced as the Fusion Center because we're fusing both federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies in some collaborative efforts to detect, prevent, and respond to criminal activities and Homeland Security activities. By Homeland Security activities, we are referencing terrorist attacks, hostile military action, or any type of extraordinary law enforcement emergency. After Roy Barnes left office, Governor Perdue took office and had a similar executive order that extended GSAC, and that has been done again by Governor Deal. It occurred to me that we really ought to let this have some continuity and codify it so that it will exist beyond any future administrations, will not have to be renewed by executive order, but we could put our stamp on it as a legislature and let folks know how important we think these activities are to protect our state from terrorist type attacks and other extraordinary emergencies. It is working extremely effectively now. and it is largely funded by the federal government grants. We were one of the first 4 states to create a fusion center such as this, and now all 50 states have them. There are relatively extensive guidelines from the federal government for each state, fusion centers, how they should operate, and part of what we are doing here on my first amendment is making sure that we have followed the federal guidelines so that our funding stream will stay the same. The First Amendment deals with the part of the bill that deals with our GEMA, and currently our Georgia Emergency Management Agency, the head of that's General Jim Butterworth, has also been designated as our Director of Homeland Security for our state. Federal government requires each state have such a designated official to coordinate and receive classified information from the federal government. This simply lays out the duties of our Director of Georgia Emergency Management Agency and by extension of that, Director of Homeland Security. And it's codifying what we're already doing and implementing the federal guidelines. The Second Amendment that I offered dealt with the membership of GSAC. And you'll notice I ended up having to amend my own amendment because I didn't get clearly back from Legislative Council what I'd wanted. And we specify in here who should be a member of this collaborative effort. And the director refers to the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And then, of course, we have the Director of Emergency Management, who is also our Homeland Security Director. I wanted the Commissioner of Public Safety, since we need statewide law enforcement involved, Commissioner of Natural Resources, Commissioner of Corrections, State Fire Marshal. It's important that the Attorney General also be involved in this, and the Adjutant General of the Georgia National Guard. In addition, you'll see the language goes on, other law enforcement personnel can be added to our Fusion Center staff, and any necessary employees and analysts can be hired by them. I would strongly encourage you to join with me in codifying what we've currently been doing, continue to keep our state safe against external threats and other criminal activities. Mr. President, if there are no questions, I would yield the well, but I'm happy to answer any questions that any senator may have.
Chair recognizes Senator the 41st for a question.
Senator Hill.
I do.
Senator, we know that's an important issue, and I appreciate your work. Do you know of any other efforts this session that we're working on areas to improve Homeland Security, separate to this legislation, which I commend you on?
Definitely in the funding process, Senator. There are a couple of initiatives going on to add additional analysts to the Fusion Center so that we have enough manpower to detect and analyze threats that may be coming in and respond to them and coordinate with our local law enforcement if we're faced with such threats in the future. So there will be funding from that, and it's also some discussion about whether or not additional facilities are needed for the GBI to house this type of GSAC Fusion Center. Other than that, I do not know of any other statutory or legislative proposals.
No further questions, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
That's what I thought. That's what I was thinking it would be. Probably.
Questions on amendment number 1, authored by the senator from the 46th. Is there objection? Without objection, amendment number 1 will be adopted. Now the question is on amendment number 2. Is there objection? I'm sorry, 2A. I said 2A. Is there objection? Without objection, amendment 2A is adopted. Now the question is on the adoption of the amendment to 2A, or 2 as amended. 2 as amended. 2 as amended. Is there objection? Without objection, amendment 2 as amended is adopted. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Is there objection? Agree on the report of committee which favor will pass the bill. Chair is none. The report of committee is agreed to. All those in favor of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed, no, and Secretary will unlock the machine. Exactly. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 53 and the nays are 0. This bill having Rex constitutional majority is therefore adopted. Secretary will read Senate Bill 417.
Senate Bill 417 by Senator Mullis of the 53rd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 7 of Title 50 of the OCGA relating to the Department of Economic Development so as to create the Georgia Film and Television Trail Act, to provide for a short title, to provide for definitions, to provide for a purpose, to provide for the Department of Economic Development to plan and develop the trail, to provide for policies, to provide for the Department of Transportation to place trail signs designed in conjunction with the Department of Economic Development, to provide for create certain immunities and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Economic Development and Tourism recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted by Senator Beach of the 21st. Mr. President, Senators Crane of the 28th and others offer the following amendment number 1 to Senate Bill 417 by inserting a new line after line 49 and renumbering accordingly. The department shall be required to get written approval from the property owner prior to placement of any signs or distribution of any printed or electronic communication designating such property as a part of the trail. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 53rd to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. From the work we've done here throughout the years, the film industry now in Georgia is third largest in America, is in the state of Georgia. And it's from the incentives that we've provided here several years ago. Now from that, though, we've created a new need. As the governor said on the film day this year, that tourism in the film industry is at a high time new level. So we need to take advantage of this. They're coming to Georgia to find out where some of these great movies were filmed. And this creates a trail paid for primarily by donations or those who want signs in their community. Local authorities participate, working together with the Department of Economic Development, the film division, to find out where we put these. And the DOT will be involved in also putting up the signs as well. Mr. President, I'll be glad to ask any questions. This is a simple bill regarding tourism, regarding our film industry in Georgia. And I'm okay with the amendment that the Senator from the 27th has brought together today.
Senator from the 6th, were you? No. Chair recognizes Senator from the 41st for a question.
Senator Yield,
Absolutely.
is there any cost associated with this, or do you expect any cost to be associated with
Well,
this?
we're hoping, the rules and regulations put together by the department, we're not sure what the sign will look like accordingly. But we're, in the bill, it asks for local contributions to put the signs up. So I don't really know.
Senator Further Yield?
Absolutely.
Was this a department bill? I mean, you referred to the department.
No, this is my own creation. Scary, isn't it?
Have you got a Senator Further Yield?
Say again?
With Senator Further Yield?
Yes.
Do you have any idea what the trail route would be, or do you have any idea what how extensive
you
it
know,
would
in
be?
my investigations, you remember the movie North by Northwest, Cary Grant, and what a great Alfred Hitchcock thriller. I saw this where they had a sign location where that was filmed, and I thought we ought to do that to inspire tourists to visit our state and to follow the trail that we'll create here.
No further questions.
Thank you,
Hitchcock.
Mr. President. I appreciate your vote on this bill to move Georgia forward in tourism, economic development.
Chair recognizes, was the senator from the 28th going to speak to the amendment? All right, very good. All right, the question now is on the adoption of the floor amendment authored by the senator from the 1st. Is there objection? Without objection, the amendment has been adopted. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Is there objection granted? Report of committee which fail pass the bill. Chair is none. Report of committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? Chair is none. Main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass? Questions on the pass of the bill. All those in favor of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed, no. Secretary will unlock the machine. I'd like to welcome to the floor of the Senate one of our former colleagues, Preston Smith, is with us here. Glad to have you visiting as well. On the pass of the bill, the yeas are 55 and the nays are 0, and this bill, MC Rex Constitutional majority, is therefore adopted. Secretary will read Senate Bill 375.
We have a substitute.
Senate Bill 375 by Senator Gucci, the 51st, and others. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 31 of Title 36 of the OCGA relating to incorporation of municipal corporations so as to provide certain requirements and standards for the incorporation of new municipal corporations, to require a financial viability, fiscal impact, and service delivery study, to prohibit the creation of unincorporated islands, to provide for special districts, for obligation to require referendum approval to repeal conflicting laws and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on State and Local Governmental Operations recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted by Senator Alvarez of the 56th. Mr. President, the Senate State and Local Governmental Operations Committee offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 375, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 31 of Title 36 of the OCGA relating to incorporation of municipal corporations so as to provide certain requirements and standards for the incorporation of new municipal corporations, to require financial viability, fiscal impact, and service delivery study, and for other purposes. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 51st to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, Senate Bill 375 is a product of another study committee that was conducted over the past few months. Senators in this room met. The study committee was chaired by the senator from the 42nd. The issue was, how do we create cities in Georgia, and what's the process, and what are the impacts to the counties and to the other cities in those communities. So with a lot of work that was done before we came into session this year, I took the information from the study, working with GMA and ACCG, and we put together, I think, will be known as a good comprehensive bill under Senate Bill 375, and I would encourage you to vote for it today, because I think it moves us in the direction of unifying everybody in both parties to work together in all of our communities around Georgia. There's several sections of the bill, and I'll go through them quickly. The first section of the bill creates a 2-year legislative process, which will be set in statute. It'll allow us as legislators to introduce the legislation to create a new city or municipality in the first year of our 2-year term. Between years 1 and 2 of your term, it'll require a feasibility study to be done by a research institute, whether that would be Georgia Tech or the Carl Vinson Institute of Georgia at UGA or Georgia State University. The viability study and the fiscal impact study and the service delivery study will look at different options and different variables, and I'll give you some examples. One is it'll include the economic viability of the proposed city and the amount of taxes and fees necessary to sustain the services proposed to be provided by the city for its first and subsequent years. It'll also look at financial impacts of the new city on the remaining unincorporated area of the county, as well as the existing municipalities, and the amount of taxes and fees necessary to sustain the appropriate levels of service provided by the county to the unincorporated areas after the incorporation. It'll also look at the impact of the new city's franchise fees on the utility bills of both residents of the new municipality and of the unincorporated areas. It'll look at the financial impact of the new city on the county in providing countywide services, and it'll look at estimated financial impacts of any pension obligations directly attributable to the provision of local government services which may be left unfunded as a result of the incorporation. The next section of the bill talks about a proposed service delivery strategy. This is where we'll get into the weeds of city and county government, so I won't get too far into that, but I'll go over it briefly. Between the legislative sessions, between year 1 and year 2, a proposed service delivery strategy summary must be provided by the proponents. Ideally, that would be through the use of an advisory council or an advisory committee that would be appointed by the delegation of the city of which the representatives of the House and the Senate would compose of that area and that county. They would look at all local government services proposed to be provided or primarily funded by the new city and any changes in services to be provided by the county after the incorporation takes place. The last section of the bill, and I'll cut it short, it will not allow for any islands to be created in the unincorporated areas of the county, and it will call for a referendum to be conducted only in the general election and not in a special election. Mr. President, I'll yield for any questions, and I'll ask for your favorable consideration of the bill.
You do have questions, Senator. Chair recognizes first the senator from the 40th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. The gentleman yield?
Yes, sir, I will.
Is it not true that I was a member of the study committee and I think there's some real good work in this bill?
Yes, sir, I believe you are aware.
Is it further not true that when I look at the part about the pension obligations, that if in fact there are ongoing liabilities, even though the service has ceased for the new city, if it's a responsibility because of poor management of the pension, should the new city be responsible for paying for that, in your opinion?
I don't have an opinion on who should be responsible for paying it, but I do think that it's important that the committee that looks at the new city area and the proposed incorporation makes it obvious to the legislature what those obligations will be or have been, so you can determine as a senator or as a House member whether you want to make that part of your referendum or not, and as part of the legislation that you propose.
Okay, I appreciate your work in this, but as you know, there's some legislation pending over the House, and I'm very concerned about the pension obligation. I will probably have to vote no, but in the whole, I think your bill is very, very good. Thank you.
Well, this study does not obligate anyone whether you're going to be incorporated or you're going to remain unincorporated. It simply brings back the information so all of us can make a determination based on the facts that were created.
Chair recognizes senator from the second for a question.
Senator, do you yield?
I do.
Does this directly pertain to incorporating other areas, unincorporated areas for a city?
Repeat your question.
Does this bill in any way affect a city trying to incorporate a unincorporated part of a county?
After January of next year, any area of an unincorporated county must go through this study process before becoming a city and before the referendum is held. Yes, sir. So this would obligate all of us as senators to follow these procedures that we don't currently follow today.
Thank you, Senator.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 8th for a question.
Would the senator yield?
I do.
I do not see anywhere in here that this would give the county a veto over an area that wanted to incorporate if they met the standards.
No, sir. There's no veto powers by anyone or for anyone in this bill.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 54th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield for a friendly question?
I will.
In an effort to clarify my friend from the second's question, I think his question dealt with annexation for an existing city as opposed to a new city or creation of a new city. And I just wanted to make clear, this bill does not affect any existing city's rights to annex. Is that correct?
That's correct. I did not hear the word annexation come from him, but if that's what he intended to ask, this does not impact annexations anywhere in Georgia.
If you'd have put that in there, you'd probably gotten a unanimous vote, Senator.
We can make a friendly amendment on the floor if you'd like, Mr. President.
No further questions.
Thank you for your vote.
Questions on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection? Without objection, committee substitute will be adopted. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Is there objection? Agreed. Report of committee which fail pass the bill. Chair is none. Report of committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? Chair is none. Main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass? Questions on the pass the bill. All those in favor of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed no. Secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 55, the nays are 1, and this bill, AMC Rex Constitutional Majority, is therefore adopted. Secretary will read SR 604. 604.
Senate Resolution 604 by Senators Heath, 31st, and others, a resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution so as to prohibit the levy of state ad valorem taxes, to provide for applicability, to provide for the submission of this amendment for ratification or rejection, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Finance recommends that this resolution do pass, respectfully submitted by Senator Hill, the 32nd. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 31st. Present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is not a new measure. We took this up a few days ago, and there were some folks that were not here that wished to have an opportunity to vote on it. Very simply, this is to remove the quarter mil state ad valorem tax provision from the Georgia Constitution. Good taxpayer-friendly bill. I would appreciate your support, and I will yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 41st to speak to the bill or resolution.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I rise again today to urge you to defeat this bill. Once again, it's only tying the hands of the legislature to deal with the important issues facing our state. We know that we have education funding problems. We know we have challenges ahead of us. And we should have every opportunity to look at the best way to solve Georgians' problems. Presently, we do not, since January, have not had any ad valorem taxes. We're not collecting this type of taxes. But if revenue needed to be raised, it takes an option off the table. It doesn't say to Georgia citizens, we're never raising any taxes. There's another constitutional amendment for that, but it's saying that we're going to raise it in a different way. We're going to raise your taxes on either sales tax or on professional licensing fees or taxes on professions like they did in Florida or other ways. So this isn't solving the problem of no taxes for Georgia, but it's taking away a way if we needed revenue because of an emergency, because of educational needs. It's just taking away an avenue to try to find solutions for Georgia. We know from economic studies that having a diverse tax base is important. So as legislators, as people trying to formulate the best public policy possible for Georgians, it makes sense to leave every avenue there to try to find out what's best for Georgia. Also, as states or as national bond rating companies look at Georgia, they look at not only what our debt versus income level is, they look at not only what our funding of our pension programs are, but they look at what tools states have to find solutions if needed. And by passing continually these constitutional amendments that have no immediate effect, like our cap on the state income tax, now a constitutional amendment about the ad valorem, you're taking out options. It doesn't mean to Georgia citizens you won't raise taxes. It means you're going to do it in a different way. And I say that future legislators should have every opportunity possible to look at all the strategies involved so they can make the best decision for our state. So therefore, I think it's best that we don't look at just passing something to say a political gotcha, political talking point to go home, yeah, we capped ad valorem taxes, they'll never happen again. I think it's important for us to go home and say, we are Georgia leaders, and we are going to continue leading, trying to find the best solutions for Georgians. And if that means that we lower taxes, that's great. I think everyone, Democrat and Republican, hates to ever raise taxes. But we should not, to get a political windfall, take options off the table for future legislative decision makers in this state. So I urge you to defeat this resolution. I'll yield the well.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Is the objection granted? Report of committee which fail pass to the bill. Chair is none. Report of committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any objections? Chair is none. Main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass? Questions on the pass of the bill. All those in favor of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed, no. Secretary will unlock the machine. Just as a reminder, this is a constitutional amendment. 2/3 required. 38 votes. pass of the bill? On the pass of the bill, the yeas are 38, the nays are 17, and just enough votes to acquire a constitutional amendment, and therefore this resolution is adopted. Chair now recognizes Senator from the 31st.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to move that we remove Senate Resolution 388 from the table.
388 senators moving to remove it from the off the table, and it will go, if done, it will go to the foot of the calendar, just so everyone understands. Is there objection? There is objection on removing it from the table. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Resolution 388 by Senator Heath, the 31st, and others, a resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution in a manner consistent with the United States Constitution so as to prevent discrimination in the public funding of social services by allowing religious or faith-based organizations to receive public aid directly or indirectly for the provision of such services, to provide for the submission of this amendment for ratification or rejection and for other purposes.
The senator has moved, and there is objection. Is anyone wanting to debate it? All those in favor? Rise, stand, and be counted. If you're in favor of removing it from the table, rise, stand, and be counted. Reverse. On the motion, the yeas are 31 and the nays are 15, and the bill has been removed from the table and will be placed at the foot of the calendar at this time. Chair recognizes Senator from the 29th.
Mr. President, I'd move to remove from the table Senate Resolution 675.
Senate Resolution 675, Secretary will read.
Senate Resolution 675 by Senator McCoon of the 29th and others, a resolution proposing amendment to the Constitution so as to declare English as the official language of the state of Georgia and for other purposes. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Is there objection? There is objection. Do you wish to debate it? No. All those in favor of removing Senate Resolution 675 from the table will rise, stand, and be counted if you're in favor. Remember, it will be going to the foot of the calendar. Senator from the 37th, your light's on. Did that lady next to you turn that on? That's what I was afraid of. Reverse. On the motion to remove the bill from the table, the yeas are 37, the nays are 15, and the bill has been removed from the table and will be placed at the foot of the calendar. Chair recognizes Senator from the 37th.
Mr. President, I move that Senate Bill 420 be removed from the table and moved to the foot of the calendar.
420, Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 420 by Senator Tippins of the 37th and others, a bill to be entitled an Act to amend Chapter 1 of Title 36 of the OCGA relating to general provisions applicable to counties so as to require referendum approval prior to the expenditure of public funds for the establishment of a fixed guideway transit, to provide for definition, to provide for submission of the question to qualified voters, to provide for ballot language, to provide for applicability, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws and for other purposes.
Is there objection? There is objection. You wish to debate the objection? No. All those in favor of the motion to remove from the table, rise, stand, and be counted. Reverse. On the motion to remove from the table, the yeas are 32 and the nays are 16, and the motion to remove from the table has passed, and the bill will be placed for the calendar. Now, Secretary will read Senate Bill 310.
Senate Bill 310 by Senator Ligon of the 3rd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 1 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to general provisions relative to education so as to prohibit the limitation of certain grants affecting education policy regarding pre-kindergarten through grade 12 education until a written analysis is provided and the grant terms are ratified by the General Assembly, to provide for a definition, to provide for a short title, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Education and Youth recommends that this bill do pass by substitute, respectfully submitted by Senator Tippins of the 37th. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Education and Youth offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 310, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 1 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to general provisions relative to education so as to provide for written notice prior to applying for certain grants affecting education policy regarding pre-kindergarten through grade 12 education, to provide for a definition, to provide for a short title, to provide for related matters, to appeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 3rd to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 310 provides that before the state accepts any competitive educational grants in an amount in excess of $20 million, that we run a cost-benefit analysis of what this will do to the state, what will it cost the state financially, what would it would cost local school systems financially. It also requires us to look at what laws would need to be repealed or changed. We disclose the purpose of the grant and examine any compliance mandates or policy directives that could be imposed because of the grant. This report is then to be presented to the education committees in the Senate and the House so that there could be more disclosure and transparency, and so that the impact of the grant could be fully understood and vetted and discussed. Sometime it could be that we may decide, just as a matter of policy, not to accept some of these grants because of that. Over the this,
You have a number of questions.
Okay.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 40th for a question.
Gentleman yield.
Yes, sir.
Senator, isn't it true that all we're trying to do here is to make sure that before we accept a large grant, and I think there's only been 2 over $20 million in the last decade, that the legislature actually has input on this?
You're exactly right.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 41st for a question.
Senator Yield.
Yes, sir.
So this allows a 30-day notification with various information, but it doesn't require approval or anything. You're to notify. But
right. No, it doesn't require ratification by the legislature. It's just a notification to the education committees in the Senate and the House.
And Senator, further yield?
Yes, sir.
Lines 22 to 24, talking about the costs associated that may be unfunded. In the 2 grants the Senator 40th referred to last decade, have you seen a lot of additional costs that were resulted from those grants?
Yes, there have been projections. When you look at cost, you had to look at teacher retraining, cost of buying textbooks that aligned with some of the programs that were part of the grants. There are significant costs that were a part of it.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 39th.
Will the senator yield?
To my friend, I sure will.
Great. Isn't it true that having these edicts or these requirements, isn't it true that they could act to put Georgia at a disadvantage with other states when applying for these funds, that when the grantor sees these special requirements, we might be less likely to receive the grants?
I fail to see how transparency could keep you from getting a grant. I would think that we would all welcome more transparency so that we understand the implications of accepting the grant, and certainly when you get into unfunded cost, changes in policy that are driven from places other than the state of Georgia.
Will Senator further
Yes,
yield?
sir. Yes, sir.
To follow up on that issue, couldn't a grantor be in a position of believing that the state is less committed to achieving the kind of reforms necessary to educate Georgia's children if, for example, you know, the legislature must be apprised of any laws that must be passed or rescinded to comply with the terms of the grant, including budgetary consideration? If that was indeed the case.
Well, first of all, Senator, you're assuming that Georgia is incapable of reforming education on its own, and I'm one who happens to believe that the state is in a much better position than anyone in Washington, D.C., or any of these large corporations and private foundations that are behind some of these grants to reform and administer education in the state of Georgia. So, no, I don't think that it sends any message other than Georgia wants to take responsibility for the education of its children. Georgia is capable of doing that, and the people of this state want to understand what we're getting into before we accept a grant.
Will the Senator further yield for
Yes,
one more
sir.
question? Isn't it true that while I afford you your opinion, that I in no way, indirectly or directly, believe that Georgia is incapable of reforming education, although I regret that it hasn't done as much as it could?
Well, yes, sir, but I believe we could do more perhaps if we unshackled ourselves from the federal policy. So.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator on the 10th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Senator yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, I guess I'm not understanding your legislation, and perhaps you can enlighten me regarding grants. I always assumed that for the state to get a grant, they had to make application. Is that correct?
Well, you do. Now, understand that I'm talking about the competitive grants, which are a specialized grant that we've looked at, that we've been involved in the area of education. And a lot of times these grants have conditions, they have unfunded costs and mandates. And so, yes, we would apply for it, but we want to know what the cost will going to be, and we want that to be more public and transparent so that not just a few people fully understand what's going on, but the representatives of the people, the legislature, they should have involvement in it as well.
Senator Yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, if we are in fact, meaning the state, applying for a grant, why shouldn't we know this information before making applications for a grant? And I'm just assuming for a moment that the grant process is not made in a vacuum, that there's a lot of entities that's involved. Is that not correct, Senator?
But sometimes it's not disclosed and it's not as public as it should be. And what we're saying here with this bill is that we want to report back to the legislature. Right now, there's no obligation that the legislature be a part of that at all. In fact, the last $400 million grant that the state accepted, the competitive grant, the legislature had no voice in it at all. There was never a vote on that. But yet, those obligations were imposed on the state and were imposed on local school systems, and we bore the cost of implementing some of those grants. So what we're saying here is, you know, before we take all of this on, something with huge implications like this, we need to know, and we need to put it out there so that people such as yourself could maybe raise an objection or express a concern. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Senator Yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, wouldn't it make much sense just to have legislation to say you can't apply for a grant until the General Assembly is notified?
Well, that was the original bill that was offered, but going through the committee process, there was some concern that could perhaps slow down the grant application process. So this was the next best thing. I would love to do exactly what you said, but you know, this is what we could get, and for that reason, I'm supporting the bill in its current form, and we at least have some knowledge and some preview of what's going to happen.
Senator Yield, for
Yes,
one
sir.
final question.
Yes, sir.
Senator, what makes us experts in any particular area regarding a particular grant?
Well, when you're looking at a cost-benefit analysis, we rely on people. This would require the State Board of Education, the Department of Education, to run those cost-benefit analysis for us. We would be able to look at it and criticize it, and there may be some concerns, and perhaps we could slow that process down and not get ourselves into something that could cost us more money than it's worth. So.
I'm sorry I said it, but the last question to Senator Yield.
Yes, sir.
So you're relying on the same people that's making the grant to give you the information of which the grant they're applying for, is that correct?
But what I'm saying now is now if you're on the edge, now we would not have access to that information at all. But what I'm saying is that if we have it, then we have the opportunity to look at it, to reach out to other sources and criticize it. And when I say criticize, I mean constructive criticism, to analyze it and make sure that the analysis is correct, that our resources may agree with what's being said. So it's just an opportunity to see it and have a voice into it and reach out to other people that could help us with that review and analysis.
Senator Yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, do we have an independent body that can perform those tasks without going back to the DOE?
Well, there are lots of think tanks and groups that that are well respected, that have looked at some of these grants before. For example, the Fordham Foundation, when they were looking at the grant that brought Common Core, their analysis was, you're going to spend all of this time and all of this money, and you'll see little, if any, benefit on academic achievement. Well, those reports weren't vetted, so we have resources available to us that could help us review these and have constructive criticism of it.
Senator Yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, your legislation says go back to the General Assembly, not go back to think tanks. I'm really confused about your efforts and what you're trying to do.
What I'm saying, though, is that we have that as a resource available to us, but in order for us to do that, we have to know what's going on. We have to see the program, and that's what this legislation requires. It requires disclosure to us, and then as legislators, we make a judgment on what we're going to do with it, where we're going to seek help in order to have a proper analysis of what's going on.
But it's disclosure after the fact rather than before the fact.
No, this says before the implementation of the grant. If you look at line prior to submitting the grant application, 30 days prior to submitting the grant application, the disclosure has to be made. So you have the 30-day period before the grant is even applied for, and then you would have the period when the grant is being processed, which perhaps the legislature could make some analysis, or there could be some objections and maybe stop something that might not be so good for the state.
Senator Yield, one final question.
Yeah, this will be the last one.
Thank you, Senator. I guess I'm trying to understand the grant process because in my opinion, a lot of grants are made to try and solve a particular issue or problem that we may have in the state, particularly since we're talking about DOE.
Right.
And it may not be known what the implications or the impact of that grant would be until after the grant is implemented. I'm just trying to understand, so how is it that we can insert ourselves in that process?
For example, here's some questions that you might want to ask. If we knew that we had the opportunity to apply for a large grant, then 30 days before that grant is submitted, the legislature has to be given this information. And so you know that this grant is coming. And maybe you have the opportunity to check and see, well, have there been any programs which have piloted what's being proposed here so that you know that it works? If there haven't been any pilot programs, maybe we want to raise an objection and say, no, we don't need to go down this road until it's piloted. Or you may look at it and you may decide, well, this is going to cost the state much more after the terms of the grant expires than we'll ever get out of it. So maybe we don't need to get into it in the first place. But the point is, it gives us notice, it gives us an opportunity to at least look at it and have some constructive criticism of it and voice objections if necessary.
Senator, we're here for 40 days, so we are to hold off. They're to hold off on submitting the grants until we're in
No,
session?
it says 30 days before, so it would go to the committee members even if they're not in session. It's to
Thank
go
you,
to them.
Senator.
So. President, unless there are any questions,
There are additional ones you wish to answer, or you want to yield the well?
I'll just yield the well.
The senator has yielded the well. The senator has elected to yield the well. Senator from the 39th, you wish to be recognized to speak to the bill? You are recognized to do so at this time.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I don't mean to have extended debate, although I will ask questions at the end of my comments. I will answer questions or take questions. The only thing I want to do is just emphasize that it would be a bad thing if Georgia, I repeat, it would be a bad thing if Georgia was less competitive because this bill, if this bill was to become law, it could be interpreted as Georgia being less committed to the goals of a grantor and thus make it more difficult for Georgia to benefit when competing, the operative word competing. If Georgia's competing against other states, when a grantor, the federal government, or even a private entity, a foundation, was to read this raft of requirements, it could very well make us less competitive and then put our children at a disadvantage. So that's my concern. The part of the section which was, I think, most objectionable has been removed, but it still, I fear, would result in a chilling effect on Georgia competitiveness. And I just want to emphasize, this is not to say that Georgia is less committed to school reforms, would be that Georgia cannot do it by itself, but it is always important to have as many partners as you can in this endeavor or any other endeavor. But I do not question the senator from the 3rd's motives. When it comes down to transparency, when it comes down to openness, that is something he and I are oftentimes in agreement on. So this is not in any way a reflection on my respect and consideration for the senator from the 33rd. We just disagree. So I would just ask you to keep that issue in mind, competitiveness, and I'll yield the well, Mr. President, unless the senator from the 3rd or any of my colleagues has a question for me.
You do have a question by the minority leader, if you would be willing to yield for the senator from the 41st.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Senator yields.
Senator, will you yield? Do you have some concern that this type of legislation, just of its very nature, may be seen as kind of a rebuke to the department or something that may in some way cause them to be hesitant in the future applying for grants, whether they're good or bad, afraid that they may be getting rebuked somehow in this, or is that not the case?
While it may not be the intention of the author to rebuke, but it could be seen as an intervention in the Department of Education's constitutional authority, and thus be interpreted in the way that you characterize, Senator.
Senator, further yield.
Yes.
Senator, isn't it true that we have received a couple large $20 million plus grant over the last 15 years?
Yes.
And prior to them ever being approved or Georgia getting the money, long before there were newspaper articles, there was information in the public about Georgia applying for these competitive grants. Is that not true?
Yes, that's correct. That's
and
my
is
understanding.
it also not true that many times you have shown an interest in either grant programs or other department actions that you as a legislature or each and every legislator member of this body can go to a department, ask for information, and try to get as comfortable or as much knowledge about something as they can on their own. Nothing prohibits somebody now from looking into these matters if they wish to spend the time.
I agree with you. I don't know if it's necessary for us to do this bill because the kind of opportunities to look at applications, I think that each and every one of us as a member of the Senate or in the House or the regular public that we serve, that we work for, ought to have an opportunity to look at the application and to determine for themselves whether the application is done well or not and what its implications for citizens of the state are. I agree with you, Senator. Mr. President, I yield the well unless there are more questions.
Senator from the 3rd does have a question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does Senator yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, were you here when Georgia accepted the $400 million Race to the Top grant?
Yes, I was.
Did you review any of the terms of the grant?
If I had wanted to, I would have surely had the opportunity to do so.
And you certainly would have appreciated a report that would have provided you with the information listed in Senate Bill 310, correct?
If I had wanted to, I would have looked at it, I would have reviewed it, I would have had Senate research review it for me, and I would have done my own research. If I had wanted to do it, it would have been open to me as a citizen and as a member of the legislature. So whether or not I looked at it or not is irrelevant, except to the extent that any citizen ought to and does have the right to look at that application.
And are you aware that some states actually require legislative ratification of their grants?
Well, you know, and I would hope that they're not at a competitive disadvantage. Whether or not any state, whether it be Alaska, Massachusetts, California, Florida, or any other state does this, the question before us today at this very hour, at this moment, is whether or not this state ought to do it. I don't think we should.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I yield the well.
Question now is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection? Without objection, committee substitute is adopted. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Is there objection to agreeing to report of committee which failed to pass the bill? Chairs none. Report of committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Or are there any objections? The chair is none. Main question is in order. Shall this bill now pass? The question is on. Pass the bill. All those in favor of the bill vote aye. Those opposed no. Secretary unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 36 and the nays are 18, and this bill having received requisite constitutional majority is therefore adopted. Secretary will read Senate Bill 409. Senator from the 43rd, please stand by.
Senate Bill 409 by Senators Vanessa, the 43rd, and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 15 of Article 6 of Chapter 2 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to miscellaneous provisions under the Quality Basic Education Act, so as to require every public school to post a sign containing the toll-free telephone number operated by the Division of Family and Child Services of the Department of Human Services to receive reports of child abuse or neglect, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senate Committee on Education and Youth recommends that this bill do pass by substitute, respectfully submitted by Senator Tippins of the 37th.
Senator from the 43rd, you'll have to go back to your desk to be recognized. I'm sorry. That is commonly, commonly those freshman mistakes. You have to read the rule book to stay at your desk to be recognized.
Mr. President, the Senate Education Youth Committee offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 409, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 15 of Article 6 of Chapter 2 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to miscellaneous provisions under the Quality Basic Education Act so as to require every public school to post a sign containing the toll-free telephone number operated by the Division of Family and Child Services of the Department of Human Services to receive reports of child abuse or neglect, to provide that no cause of action is created, to provide for a related matter to appeal convicting laws and for other purposes.
Amendment number 1 by Senator McCoon and others.
Mr. President, Senator McCoon of the 29th and others offer the following amendment number 1 to Senate Bill 409 by striking on line 15 the words "and Spanish."
Amendment number 2 by Miller of the 40th and Schaefer of the 48th.
I don't think I can.
Spanish, add such other languages as may be determined by the local board.
Mr. President, Senators Miller of the 40th and Schaefer of the 48th offer the following amendment number 2 to Senate Bill 409 by on line 15, striking the word Spanish and adding other such languages as may be determined by the local Board of Education. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair now recognizes Senator from the 43rd to present this very important piece of legislation.
Mr. President and colleagues of the Senate, today I bring for your consideration Senate Bill 409. Senate Bill 409 passed out of the Senate Education and Youth Committee as a committee sub by a unanimous vote. It was very well vetted in that committee, I might add. I sponsored Senate Bill 409 to provide protection for children who are the victims of child abuse and neglect, and it requires public schools and charter schools to post the 1-800 number that's already established under the structure of the Department of Family and Children's Services. There is no fiscal note for this bill, as it is a 24/7 number already posted and in place. Each public school will have those posted in a visible area, readily accessible to students. This bill does not create a cause of action against the school system. It is up to the Department of Education to adopt rules and regulations regarding the size and location of the sign, but the sign must be clearly visible in public areas of the school and accessible to students. The bill would provide a method for these victims of abuse to seek help and comfort without risking harm at home. We must do all we can to protect our most vulnerable citizens, who are our children. This also allows for employees and teachers who are under a mandate by law to be reminded frequently of their obligation to protect our children. Thank you, Mr. President.
There are, I'm sorry, did this bill, let's see, Mr. Secretary, did this bill go through the committee process?
You have the bill there. Mr. President, the bill did go through the committee process, and it was favorably reported by the Committee on Education and Youth.
Didn't seem like it got a lot of perfection. Number of amendments, many speakers. Chair recognizes Senator from the 56 for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I will.
Senator, I want to first congratulate you on your first bill and bringing this very important subject to us. And
thank you, Senator.
I, too, am familiar with Part 15 of Article 6 of Chapter 2 of Title 20 in the Official Code of Georgia. And I know that you are, but to help all the other senators here who might not know, could you give us a brief summary of that?
I would be happy to. However, because of our wonderful lunch today and our extensive schedule, I think they'd prefer me to do that offline.
Senator, let's go a little further here. It seems like this is a very punitive type bill that apparently, the way that I'm reading it, is you are forcing a mandate to these local school systems. Are you against local control?
I'm all for local control. However, when it comes to children's welfare, I'm a strong advocate.
Senator, will you yield for one final question?
I would be happy to.
Now, I'm hoping you're going to do better than your other freshman senator. Now, in Section 2, on line 24 of your bill, I'm sure you've got it in front of you, don't you?
No, I almost have it memorized.
You don't have your...
It's such an extensive bill that I actually spent a lot of time working on the numerous
Wonderful,
pages.
Senator. So if you could just recite line 24 for me then.
I'd be at a loss.
Well, it says that all laws and parts of laws in conflict with this act are repealed. Would you please detail which laws will be repealed in your bill for the Senate?
Well, there's a couple I'd like to start with. Fines for businesses would be a great one. That's
Thank you,
all I can
Senator.
think of right now. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 33rd. Your seatmate has a few questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator yield?
Yes.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to say how wonderful it's been to work with you, and you've brought a great breadth of professionalism and enthusiasm to our section over here. Plus, you're a lot better looking than Senator Ramsey.
Thank you.
No, you're supposed to say, isn't that true?
I would agree. I would agree.
I just got one question for you.
Yes.
It seems that you hadn't conferred with the senator from the 29th when you wrote this bill, had you? When it came to Spanish and English, weren't you the one who voted to bring that, bring his resolution back to the floor?
I did.
Did you take the time out to read your bill where it talks about Spanish and English?
We talked about that in the Education Subcommittee.
Did you follow the recommendation?
We did not. Oh, actually, Senator Tippins did bring that point up, so I might note that he did.
Refer to
By the 37th.
senator's
Senator
number
from the
opposed
37th.
to the 37th.
Well, if we live in a diverse county like Gwinnett, would we also have to add Spanish, Arab, and Korean to these posters?
That's not mandated. I think on here it says the Department of Education is allowed to adopt the rules and regulations regarding size and location. So that may be another consideration that they could mandate.
Just one more question, will
Yes.
you? By abuse, are you talking about moral turpitude?
No.
Will you be promoting moral turpitude by posting these posters around the school?
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 53rd who let this bill out of his very powerful Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield,
Yes.
does the senator from the 33rd need to understand that that is my line?
Yes, exactly.
Senator, also, your Senate bill number is 409.
Yes, it is.
Now, this is on my desk. Is there a hidden meaning for you to put this on my desk?
We're going to clean up crime. That was the premise
Is it
behind
crime
it.
you were talking about? I mean,
Yes.
it is on my desk. There's something that you're trying to say?
We picked specific places to put them. They were
I didn't
very
know you were
strategic.
French. Senator, further in.
Yes.
To go along with the senator from the 33rd and talk about moral turpitude, could you tell me why it's not in your bill?
I felt like I addressed all the premises that needed to be addressed and made it quite simple
Okay,
for
let me
people to
let
understand.
me Senator, let me reword that.
Yes.
Could you tell me why it's not in your bill?
That sounds familiar.
Well, let me also tell you or ask you. Could you tell me can you tell me what moral turpitude means?
Do you an explanation or an example?
Well, I'm asking questions.
Okay.
But I need a definition of moral turpitude, if you would.
You know, I haven't had to look that up because I try and follow the letter
you
of the
don't
law.
know
So
the-
I would say the definition would be an example of people that break the law and are.
No further questions.
Okay, sorry. I'm a rule follower.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 40th. From the 40th, another colleague from.
Senator Yields,
I will.
is it not true that I appreciate you representing DeKalb County?
That is true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I want to ask you a couple of serious questions, if I may.
Okay.
Is it not true that the bill deals with child abuse?
That is true.
Is it further not true that there are two amendments on the desk? One deals with deleting the word Spanish, and the other amendment's going to deal with adding or other such languages as may be determined by the local Board of Education?
That is true.
Okay. Is it further not true that because this is a serious subject at a local level, it's probably necessary we don't limit this to one or two languages, but leave it up to our local boards of education to decide?
Right, and I do believe in local control, and that would be an option that could be left up to the local
Thank you,
boards.
Senator. I appreciate it.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 54th for a few questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I will.
Senator, I read with interest your bill, and I do appreciate your stand in favor of Georgia's children. My question is, when does your stand begin?
What is my stand to begin?
When does your stand begin? You're taking a stand for students. When does this help come to Georgia's students?
Immediately upon the signature of this bill. It's available now. As a 1-800 number, it's in place.
Immediately upon whose signature?
The governor's signature.
You may want to research Georgia law on that point, Senator.
Okay.
Senator, will you further yield?
I will.
Senator, in your bill, you indicate that this posting must be in a clearly visible location.
That's correct.
I don't know about your district specifically. I know in my district we have elementary schools and middle schools where students are on different halls. I noticed that you didn't take the step of making sure that it was available to all students. Is that an oversight on your part, or you only want to protect a portion of our schools?
It is not an oversight. It provides for a common place for the sign to be posted.
Well, it says that one sign in a clearly visible location. My question is, what if it's clearly visible to the 8th graders, but the 2nd graders never see it?
Well, the discussion was that it would be in a cafeteria and bathrooms, maybe some common places that all students would frequent throughout the day.
Would the senator further yield to tell me where cafeterias and bathrooms are referenced in your bill?
They are not.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 34th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator yield?
I will.
Senator, would you agree with me that I sponsored a bill to let students have cell phones at school without them being put on suspension at parents' request? Would you agree with me?
I did not know that.
Senator, could you tell me what ESOL stands for?
English is a second language.
Senator, is that why
English
you have...
students of another language. Yes. ESOL. English is a second language. I apologize.
Senator, would you continue to yield?
Yes.
Senator, is that why you have Spanish spelled out in your bill here today?
They were actually the most frequently used languages, and that is something that was similar in another bill from another state.
Would you continue to yield?
I will.
Senator, would it surprise you to know that in Clayton County we have so many different languages, not just Spanish, that it seems to be not including them in there? Is that not true?
That is true, and that's why there was an amendment offered today for your consideration.
Senator, if you'll continue to yield, is that your amendment?
That is not.
Beg your pardon?
That is not. I've relied on my Senate colleagues to help me refine it.
Senator, so you're saying that your first bill, you're relying on the colleagues to help you get it perfected?
Yes, that might not be the best decision, but that's where we're at now.
Senator, if you would continue to yield, because we are in a body where we do want to make sure that all bills are perfected, therefore, that's one of the reasons why I'm always mostly against engrossment, because we can't perfect it, but you have allowed this bill to come forward so that we can help make this even a better bill. Is that not true, Senator?
That's correct. As a freshman senator, I am willing to learn from my colleagues.
Thank you, Senator, for bringing it.
Thank you.
Senator from Bainbridge, Senator from the 11th, would like to ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator yield?
I will.
You've got children younger than I do. At what age is reading taught in the schools these days?
Say it again?
At what age is reading taught in the elementary schools?
As early as preschool.
As early as preschool. So you think that all of the children in pre-K can read these signs? Do you not care about the younger children in our state?
We're trying to teach them how to call 911 at that age, so yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Senator.
We'll get to that 800 number.
Chair recognizes Senator 29th. Questions?
Will the senator yield?
I will.
Now, I understand it is true that the senator took a great deal of time in perfecting this legislation in committee and researching it before bringing it to the full Senate body. Is that right?
I did.
Well, can you share with us, let's see, the bill references a toll-free telephone number that's operated by the Division of Family and Children's Services to receive these reports. Can you share with the body what that 800 number is?
I can share the first four numbers. 1-855.
Thank you, Senator.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield. Senator Yield.
I will.
Senator, are you aware that at any time you can yield the well?
Oh, no, but I'll be glad to as soon as you finish. Thank you.
I'm done.
Mr. President, I'd like to yield the well.
Yeah, all right, very good. Those are famous words, famous words. Senator from the 29th, you wish to explain your amendment? It's pretty self-explanatory, I assume, right? Chair, Senator from the 40th, you wish to explain your amendment?
Mr. President, if the First Amendment is accepted, then I've got to amend my bill because I've got to add the word. And.
Correct.
So I would have to do that if his First Amendment is successful. Just make that note.
So do you want to vote? Are you in? We're probably going to take Amendment 2 first.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Question now is on the floor amendment by the senator, or amendment number 2, floor amendment authored by the senator from the 40th. Is there objection? There is objection by the senator from the 29th. All of those in favor of amendment number 2, rise, stand, and be counted. If you are in favor of amendment number 2, rise, stand, and be counted. Reverse. On the amendment number 2, the yeas are 33 and the nays are 3. Yeas are 33, nays are 3. And the amendment has passed. Senator from the 48th, what purpose you rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Amendment number 1 strikes the word Spanish from the bill since the word Spanish is already
been stricken, is amendment number 1 now out of order on the grounds that it's nonsensical?
Senator from the 48th has stood loudly and said that the amendment is out of order. And that would be my ruling. The question now is on the adoption of the committee substitute as amended. Is there objection? Without objection, committee substitute as amended is adopted. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Is there objection? Agree in the Porter Committee. Which fair will pass the bill. Chairs none. Porter Committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Or are there any objections? Chairs none. Main question is ordered. Shall this bill now pass? Questions on the passage of the bill. All those in favor of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed, no. Secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 54, the nays are 1. And this bill, MC Rex Constitution majority, is therefore adopted. Secretary will read Senate Bill 352.
And there's a second.
Senate Bill 352 by Senator Unterman of the 45th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 1 of Title 10 of the OCGA relating to selling and other trade practices so as to provide consumer protection requirements for fantasy contest operators, to provide for definition, to provide for state registration of fantasy contest operators with the Attorney General, to authorize the Attorney General to promulgate rules and regulations, to provide civil and criminal penalties for violations, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senate Committee on Regulated Industries and Utilities recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted by Senator Jeffries of the 17th.
That's okay. That's all right. Chair recognizes Senator in the 45th. Chair recognizes Senator in the 45th.
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. President, I'd like to move that Senate Bill 352 be moved to the foot of the calendar after Senate Bill 420, I believe.
The senator is moving that the bill that she's a sponsor of, Senate Bill 352, be moved to the foot of the calendar. Is there objection? Without objection, the bill will rest at the foot of the calendar. Secretary will read Senate Bill 6.
Senate Bill 6 by Senators McCune of the 29th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapters 5, 11, and 16 of Title 40 of the OCGA relating to driver's licenses, abandoned motor vehicles, and the Department of Driver Services respectively, so as to provide that persons who possess a lawful alien status are the only category of non-citizens who may obtain a license, permit, or card to require the Department of Driver Services to participate in the records and information from DMVs for E-Verify initiative of the United States Department of Homeland Security to provide for later matters to repeal conflicting laws and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senate Committee on Public Safety recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted by Senator Harper of the 7th. Mr. President, the Senate Public Safety Committee offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 6, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 5 of Title 40 of the OCGA relating to driver's licenses so as to provide that persons who possess a lawful alien status are the only category of non-citizens who may obtain certain licenses, permits, or cards, to provide for driver's privileges for persons who are current recipients of grants of deferred action which shall operate the same as driver's licenses, to provide for definitions and for other purposes. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes Senator 29th. Present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've offered an amendment which will be coming around and be distributed to you in a few minutes. But let me take a moment to walk through the substitute. I do want to thank my colleague, the senator from the 7th, for spending a lot of time working with me on this issue to get it right. We've had a problem for a number of years in our state with respect to the issuance of Georgia driver's licenses. And that is that the law that was originally adopted by the General Assembly to confer the privilege of receiving a Georgia driver's license used the term throughout the code lawful presence, which generally at the time it was adopted was limited to people who actually had some lawful basis for being in the United States. What we have seen over the last several years is expansive executive action to create a class of individuals who have no lawful status to be in the United States, but who do, there at least is an argument, and the argument's pending right now, as to whether or not they are lawfully present in the United States. And as a result, the Department of Driver Services has issued thousands of Georgia driver's licenses to individuals who have no lawful status to be in the United States. So what we intend to do through the introduction, through the passage of Senate Bill 6, is to correct that problem. And in the substitute version, what we do is we set out a statutory system where an individual who meets certain requirements will be able to receive in the substitute, you see it referred to as a driver's privilege card. In the amendment that will be distributed, it's referred to as a driver's safety card. And the difference between a driver's safety card and a driver's license is simply this. A driver's safety card only confers on someone the ability to lawfully drive on Georgia roads. We all know the many, many uses for a Georgia driver's license that go well beyond simply having the privilege of driving on our roads. Driver's licenses are used for voter registration. Driver's licenses are used for identity verification. Driver's licenses are used to gain access to secure areas of government buildings. Driver's licenses are used for a variety of commercial transactions, from renting a vehicle to making purchases of certain items. So a driver's license really affords someone a great deal of privileges beyond simply driving the roadways. So by establishing a protocol where an individual can receive a driver's safety card, we address the issue that some have raised of, well, we have people that are in the country for an indeterminate period of time. What do we do for those individuals between now and whenever this question of the executive action that's been taken is resolved? And we address it by saying, as long as the deferred action is in place, or for a period of 5 years, whichever comes first, once the driver's safety card is issued, it will be in force and available for use during that period of time. There are a number of things that will be printed on the card, and again, this is something that is addressed a little bit more fully in the amendment, but it will prominently read that there's a driver's safety card only, that it's not for identification purposes, that the individual has no lawful status, that they're under a grant of deferred action. It will also include language to the effect that it's not for any other purposes. It will be, also in the amendment, we will address the issue of having a vertical orientation for this card instead of a horizontal orientation, so that again, it is clearly distinguishable from the present driver's license. I should mention that the driver's licenses that are being issued, or that have been issued to folks in this status previously, are only distinguishable from the driver's license that any member of this body would have by the words limited term, printed in very small print on the front of the card. Very easy to confuse that with a regular Georgia driver's license. So we're taking a number of steps to make sure that the driver's safety card will be distinguishable, and that includes having the vertical orientation. If you go over to section 3 around lines 160 and going forward, you'll see the reference to a special identification card, which will largely mirror the driver's safety card. And some people have asked, well, why would there be an identification card? Because under the OCGA 50-36-1, an identification card is one of those public benefits that one would be entitled to if they were within this status. So just as we want to distinguish a driver's safety card from a regular Georgia driver's license, we want to distinguish the identity card that would be received from the identity card that would be issued to a Georgia citizen, a U.S. citizen, or someone else with lawful status who receives ID cards. Because the state issues those ID cards today in lieu of a driver's license, primarily for voting purposes. And you'll see that that generally tracks the same language as what the driver's safety card would look like. And the amendment again will make clear that it's got the same vertical orientation. I don't think I mentioned this about the driver's safety card, but in case of both the driver's safety card and the special identification card, the department will obtain fingerprints as well for identification and verification purposes. I think that largely carries forward what you see in the substitute before you. I'll try to address the amendment once it comes forward and has been fully distributed. But I do want to take a moment or two to just make clear the rationale behind bringing this bill forward, because I did see something on the desks. If you know, it may be the first time I've ever seen the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute say that we would be spending too much money on a government agency. But it does say in there that, you know, why would you do this? Why would you go to the expense of having a distinguishable driver's safety card and a distinguishable special identity card? And the first answer, frankly, is for voting purposes. It's very obvious to anyone that has seen a Georgia driver's license and the so-called limited term Georgia driver's license that it is an invitation to voter fraud. We are literally asking for people to register to vote using those documents. It's very difficult to distinguish between the regular Georgia driver's license and the limited term driver's license. As well with the special identity card, we want to make clear that, you know, we're going to offer the ability for people to drive, but we're not extending any of the other privileges associated with a Georgia driver's license, because again, we're talking about individuals that have no lawful status to be in the country. So we're addressing, in my view, not only a voter integrity concern that is very real, we are also addressing a public safety concern as well that frankly needs to be considered. With that, Mr. President, I'll be glad to yield to any questions, and if there are no questions, I'll be glad to yield the well.
Chair recognizes Senator from the second for a question.
Senator, do you yield?
Yes, I do.
Once again, can you tell me the public safety concerns?
Certainly. mean, right now, virtually anyone, regardless of their status, can receive a Georgia driver's license. And just as an example, you can get into secure areas of government buildings using these driver's licenses. We have very little in the way of identity verification for people that are receiving these licenses who have no lawful status. So you can easily see a situation where someone who wants to do harm, who wants to, for example, pursue a terrorist act of some kind, using a limited term Georgia driver's license to access a secure government facility and then carrying out an attack.
Senator, do you further yield?
I do.
Do we have any history of that ever occurring in our great state?
I couldn't point you to a single case that comes immediately to mind. I can think of numerous cases where we've had, for example, someone who was on a fiancé visa who was not properly vetted, who killed a number of folks over in San Bernardino a couple of months ago. So I do think that taking every possible step we can to ensure that people who receive a Georgia driver's license are properly vetted is in the public safety interest.
Senator, do you further yield?
I do.
Do we have any history of voter fraud currently in our state using the driver license?
I couldn't tell you specifically if there's been an issue of voter fraud. Certainly there could be successful voter fraud that has not been identified because, again, since our citizenship verification is being challenged in court, the Department of Justice is basically willing to enter into a consent order that would prevent us from doing any citizenship verification whatsoever. The potential for voter fraud, if it has not already occurred, is certainly great and is increasing.
Senator, do you yield for
I
another
do.
question? Senator, is there a cost affected with this new identity card?
The only cost that I've seen mentioned is the cost that the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute has projected of some $450,000. I would say to ensure the integrity of our elections and to improve public safety, that's a bargain.
Senator, is that a one-time cost or is that a yearly cost? If the senator yields.
I will yield. I believe the only involvement is a one-time change to be able to manufacture the new cards, since they do have the different orientation. There's some other unique characteristics about them, but I'm not aware of any ongoing cost once those fixed costs are addressed.
Thank you.
Sorry? Okay. Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
Yes.
You just mentioned that you're not sure what the cost might be, but say they're $450,000. Do you need to have a fiscal note with this legislation?
We do not have a fiscal note. Again, the department, has been involved with this from the beginning. My understanding is that the current capital equipment that they have can be used to manufacture the cards that we are talking about. But no, I'm not aware of any specific costs involved.
Do you not think it would be prudent to know how much it might cost? I mean, did they testify about how much it might cost in committee, for example?
We have not been made aware of any objection based on a fiscal burden that it would place on the department.
Do you further yield?
I do.
Have you seen the letter put out by the Secretary of State dated January 29th, 2016, where they verify that persons with the driver's license that is distinguished by limited term certainly are not eligible to register to vote with that driver's license?
Right, and voter fraud is also against the law. That doesn't mean that it will not occur, that someone won't use a limited term driver's license to fraudulently register and then vote.
But you do agree with me that it does distinguish itself by saying limited term, and that in our Secretary of State's opinion, there is not a problem here and there are the proper protections in place.
I think the senator may be overstating what the secretary said. I believe what he said is that it's against the law to use those documents to register, an opinion I wholeheartedly agree with. The issue is the fact that the words limited term are in tiny print. It would be very difficult to distinguish that from a regular Georgia driver's license, and that's one of the reasons we're bringing the bill forward.
No further questions, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from the 5th. Speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm not going to try and take up tons and tons of time as we get later in the day, and I know that there are a lot of bills, but I just want to point out, and I don't come to the well often, but there are those times when we seem to be out here legislating where we have a solution in search of a problem. And while I don't doubt the sincerity of the senator from the 29th that he thinks that there is a problem, I also don't doubt my 9-year-old niece's belief in Santa Claus. And the fact is that your sincere belief that a problem exists does not make a problem a reality. What we have here, and I do understand in the politics of this day, where we are, in order to run for president, you have to stigmatize people that don't look like me in order to apparently be successful enough to either get a reality show or get yourself a couple of primary victories. But that doesn't make it the right thing to do. What you're doing here, because we already have this limited term permit, and if you want to spend some money and pass a bill to train voter registration folks, to make sure that you remind folks at the DMV and the library and before you swear in someone to be a voter registrar to go out and do voter registration, that they understand that they cannot use a limited term permit to register to vote. You can train poll workers to and if you're wanting to just spend money on something, train poll workers that term, limited term, it's already on the driver's license, is on there. This is simply an effort to stigmatize people for political advantage, to discourage people who came here through no fault of their own. You have to remember what the deferred action folks are. Whether you agree with that program or not, no one I have heard of has said, oh, those people are deliberately coming here. There are people that honestly differ about what do you do with someone who was brought here by their parents or came here because someone was engaged in human trafficking or came here and ended up having to stay here because of domestic violence issues or other issues, because these all come up. And these are folks that it's not just those college students, you got to remember. It's also folks that are here on domestic violence visas, folks that were here paroled into this country by the Justice Department, by USCIS to testify against domestic abusers, to testify against human traffickers and others. You're trying to stigmatize these folks further who were victims in the first place. Regardless of why you thought they came here, they were victims in the first place being brought here. They didn't violate the law because they were choosing to come here. And you're doing that, you're creating that stigma so that you did, for simply no other reason than so people will be able to say, oh, this is someone who doesn't look like me, who doesn't look like one of us here in this chamber, so that it'll be easier to pick them out, so that it'll deter them from getting the license in the first place. I heard talk, and a couple of things I want to point out. Voter fraud, statistically, it just doesn't happen. And I'm unaware of any legitimate research by anybody, and to say, well, it may be happening and someone may be getting away with it. The only incident of voter fraud that I know of in this state in my adult lifetime involved the senator from, I want to say, and I apologize, I'm going to blank on the Rules Committee Chair's Senate district when he ran for office one time. And it had nothing to do with people in his district who were undocumented going and voting to prevent him from winning a race. It had to do with typical Georgia Southern voter corruption of ballot box stuffing. It had nothing to do with what's being discussed here, because that problem doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen in a number nationally or anywhere that anyone can show evidence of in a way that has ever had a dispositive result in an election. So this idea that there's some public safety need, well, there's a public safety need to have people who are going to be driving, to have insurance. There's a public safety need to make sure they know the rules of the road. There's not a public safety need to stigmatize someone, to put a scarlet letter on their forehead, to say, oh, I don't look like, and I'm not the senator from the 18th, or I'm not the senator from the 21st, or I don't look like the senator from the 42nd. I don't have the same faith as the senator from the 55th, or I don't have the same parentage as the senator from the 23rd. There's no public safety need for that. That's ridiculous. It would be one thing to say, we need to make sure, and if there was no way of telling a difference between the current license and a limited permit offered to someone who has deferred action, there would be a way to go there. If there was no difference at all, I would say, yes, we've got to have a bill, but we have a license, a permit in place already that we can train people to make sure that it's not ID for voting, that it's not ID for registering. But to say that there's a public safety need to prevent someone from using it as an ID in the college bookstore to write a check, or an ID to buy cigarettes, not that I think cigarette buying is a particularly great thing, or an ID to get into an R-rated movie, is just not something we ought to be spending money and time about. And it's on point, as all this is about is how to stigmatize people. All this is about is how to gain political advantage. And it's the lowest common denominator of what we should not be doing here. And so unless there are questions, I would ask you to vote against this bill and yield the well. And I'll yield the well unless there are questions.
You do have a question. Chair recognizes Senator from the 6th for a question.
This is my good friend and seatmate Yield.
I yield.
I appreciated a lot of what you said in terms of that we should not be working on something that stigmatizes people and is unnecessary. That resonates with me, and I agree with you. But I have a couple of questions. I mean, isn't it true that we offer great benefits to our citizens? Isn't it a great benefit to be a citizen of the United States?
It is a great benefit to be a citizen of the United States, absolutely. Of course, this is a benefit that is offered to people who are not citizens, and this particular benefit that you're trying to restrict also applies not just to, if you don't like anything, if you're just one of those folks that if the current president has proposed it, you're against it no matter what, then you have to remember that going back to the Reagan administration, we've had Y visas, we've had people paroled in here to testify against drug traffickers, and we've had people who are here on deferred action for deportation, I believe as the amendment put it, for other purposes than the program of the president that some people in this chamber may not like. That too is not a reason to legislate because you don't happen to like the chief executive of this country. You got a chance in November to deal with that.
Yeah, well, all that has nothing to do with this bill. But isn't it true that if we don't protect the sanctity of being a citizen, then it naturally reduces the value of citizenship?
We already are protecting it by having the current system where on the license that is current or permit that is currently issued, it says limited permit. So we are again in search. While I can agree with you, we've already solved that problem as it relates to driver's licenses or a driving permit in the state of Georgia.
But Senator,
and simply putting it in big bold letters and changing the way it's worded and telling folks that you can't use it for anything. And we're going to single you out and make sure everybody knows that you're here under a program that some members of this chamber may not like, is not ensuring, or protecting the value of citizenship in this country.
I just want to make sure I'm clear because you said we were doing a lot of things I didn't think we were doing, and it seems like we're just trying to have clarity on this important document that all of the benefits of citizenship should not confer to this person. And so it's just a clarity issue, and I don't think it's stigmatizing people. It's not hurting feelings. It's just being clear.
And respectfully, and we can disagree about that, if we were going from a situation where there was no difference between the driver's license you and I have and someone on the deferred action program had, then I would definitely say that you're correct. We should be doing something. The fact of the matter is we've already done something, and if there are issues with the fact that people have not, that government employees or people acting on behalf of the government, like in voter registration or poll workers, have not been properly trained, then we need a bill to make sure they're properly trained because it's already written on the license.
Thank you, Senator.
No further questions, Senator.
Thank you. Then I'll yield the well. Ask the, and
Oh,
ask
no,
the
there
folks
is
vote no.
There's a question, if you don't mind yielding from your colleague, the senator from 36.
I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Does the senator yield?
Yes, I will.
You made, I think, a strong point. Under the language that's before us in this bill, isn't it true? A person could not use their driver's license, which they've lawfully attained, to provide verification of their age at all the places that age verification is required. Our movies, a club that serves alcohol.
Our movies,
Purchasing
the
cigarettes.
Vortex, if that's in, if that one's in your district, you know, any club or bar that has a, yes, that is true. To buy cigarettes, anything that, to buy lighter fluid, you have to present ID.
To buy lighter fluid. And so what possible justification could you conceivably have in wanting to take those kind of punitive measures against a young person who was raised in this country, who was educated in this country, in this state, and who is here by virtue of a federal designation?
I mean, my assumption is that it's only to stigmatize, to harass, and to make them somehow more an other, as the politics of this election cycle has become on so many levels. If it were something else, if those portions about the you can't use this as an ID were stricken from the bill, it would be easier to accept the senator from the 6th argument that this is just an effort to clarify what our ID looks like. It's an effort to stigmatize people. It's an effort to take away basic ability to buy propane. I know that the senator from the 29th gave the example of people gaining access to a building. And I would remind folks that a terrorist might do this. I'm unaware of a single terrorist incident that involves that. The one instance of domestic terrorism in this state in the last 20 years was by a U.S. citizen in the Olympic Park. And please remember that. The instance that was described in San Bernardino that did not happen here was someone who, by law, would have been given a plain old license. And this limited permit couldn't use it to buy, couldn't use it as ID to get Benadryl at the pharmacy counter, would not have stopped that gentleman in San Bernardino from killing a soul if he had been here.
Isn't it true that we've heard, and I certainly have, I know you have, and we both have districts that reflect the diversity of our great state. Isn't it true that we know of young students who, by being able to get the driver's license, were then able to go out, have transportation to search for employment and to gain employment and to be working part of the workforce of our state by virtue of having a driver's license?
That's correct.
And so a great door was opened for people to work and earn and pay taxes. But isn't it true, this creates another barrier, and it says to all those young students who have that docket affirmment, you're not really worthy, and we're going to tear up that driver's license and send you through another rigmarole and make you have 2 IDs, and yes, as in your words, stigmatize them.
It is one more effort to put a scarlet letter, and it's a scarlet letter specifically aimed at the least of these, I suppose the way you would put it, the folks that have the least culpability, regardless of whether you agree with the program or don't agree with the program. These are the folks broadly, whether they were brought here by coyotes for human trafficking, whether they were brought here and became victims of domestic violence, whether they were brought here by their parents some years ago. These are the ones that didn't choose to overstay visas. They didn't choose to walk here. And we're choosing to strike out at them, the ones with the least culpability, because that seems to be the thing to do in this electoral environment based on how folks are running for president these days, and it seems to be trickling down to here, and it ought not be that way. If you really wanted to do something like the Senator of the 6th were talking about, you wouldn't make this a prohibition on ID if it really was just about clarification. I don't think it's about clarification because it's clear. If you got folks that aren't trained properly, train them properly. If that costs money, let's put it in the budget. We still got time. I haven't seen a conference committee report. There's still time. Tell me what it costs.
And that goes to another question that the senator will yield. I had a couple more inquiries.
I will yield in an abundance, but I will yield.
One is, what's your understanding? You and I have both been here a good little while. Members of this body are, I think, fairly familiar with the requirement for fiscal bills to be attached when there's going to be an expenditure of state funds. What's your understanding of the need for a fiscal note to a bill like this?
I mean, the senator knows that when we come in here as freshmen, we're taught that one of the rules, one of the statutes, one of the laws is if your bill has a fiscal impact, it's supposed to have a fiscal note. You have to have asked for it by a certain date or it'll never get here. And that it has to be expressly waived in committee by a committee chair in order for it to get through the process. There is a way to get around it, but it has to be expressly waived by the committee chair in the committee process, which didn't happen here that I'm aware of. And so there would be a need for a fiscal note, assuming that there's a fiscal impact to this, which it appears there is, because you are going to have to spend money renewing these. You're going to have to spend money retraining folks. You're going to have to spend money getting everybody from the revenue agents who are assigned to police whether or not convenience stores are properly IDing folks for cigarettes and beer, to the pharmacist. I mean, everybody's going to have to go through all of this training at that licensing end, and any agency responsible for enforcing those rules and regulations, or for citing or fining or revoking people's licenses, whether it's on the pharmacy end or in the convenience store liquor license or in a bar or wherever, that's all going to be added cost. And no one has tried to total that up. It's a knowable number. It's a number it's a math problem. It's not esoteric. So it could have been done and it was not.
Further inquiry, in that case, there would be grounds for asking for suspending action on this bill until a fiscal note is obtained. I've seen that done countless times on this floor. Isn't that true?
I believe there is. I think that would be, I mean, I'm not going to go through all the rules about how you'd have to ask the chair or ask the president to make a ruling on that, and then there's a whole process for addressing what that ruling is, and I'm not the one making that decision, but any member here can make that request of the presiding officer.
And final question, and again, you have made the point that you represent a very diverse district. Where
I represent the most diverse district in the state and one of the three most diverse state Senate seats in the entire nation. Only one in Miami and one in San Francisco and California are more diverse.
Exactly, to the point. And so you're keenly aware from your own constituent experiences about what message this type of bill sends and the way it is received by the community. And do you share, I'm sure you share, is it not true, my concerns that we should be moving away from positioning Georgia as a place of slam doors, pull in the welcome mat, not wanted here, go somewhere else, stigmatized, second-class labels, all things that our hospitality industry, isn't it true, advise us against doing. They advise us against keeping the welcome mat out, keeping the lights on, keeping the door open, sending a welcome message to the rest of the nation and to the rest of the world that Georgia welcomes you and all your diversity. Isn't that a real different road that we could be taking as opposed to this slam the door?
It is a very different road, and if you're if your primary purpose, like when I first ran for office, I actually ran, believe it or not, on a platform about economic development and economic redevelopment. If you're actually concerned about economic development and economic redevelopment in the 21st century, where you're helping, as we are supposedly helping, to lead the 10th largest state in the nation, population-wise, whose GDP would be larger than that of Belgium's if we were an independent nation, to then turn around and say we're going to go nativist and turn our backs on everything, it runs in the face of why do we have this, of the largest or the busiest airport in the world? Why are we building such a huge port in Savannah? And we're then turning around saying, oh, but we don't want you here. So yeah, it is bad for business, absolutely, to be doing this. You know, I mean, that's not the first thing that comes to mind, but it certainly sends a message. And we have been sending that message consistently since I got here, and it is taking a toll. If you start looking at some of the surveys about how Atlanta competed and beat Birmingham in the 60s, and now we're having to compete and we're not beating Charlotte in this decade of the 21st century, this is one of the reasons why we're not doing that.
Thank you, Senator.
With that, I'm going to yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go ahead and read the amendments now.
Mr. President, Senator McCune of the 29th offers the following amendment number 1 to the Senate Public Safety Committee substitute to Senate Bill 6 by replacing lines 2 through 12 with the following: driver's licenses, so as to clarify and provide for persons who may obtain certain licenses, permits, or cards, to provide for driving safety cards for persons who are current recipients of grants of deferred action on deportation, which shall operate the same as driver's licenses and for other purposes.
Read down to the same point and then read that 16 and 17.
Mr. President, Senators McCune of the 29th and Crane of the 28th offer the following amendment number 2 to the Senate Public Safety Committee substitute to Senate Bill 6 by replacing lines 2 through 12 with the following: driver's licenses, so as to clarify and provide for persons who may obtain certain licenses, permits, or cards, to provide for driving safety cards for persons who are current recipients of grants of deferred action on deportation, which shall operate the same as driver's licenses and for other purposes, and by replacing the words driver's privilege card with the words driving safety card on lines 44, 62, 64, 65, 67, 71, 78, 80, 84, 86, 88, 103, 105, and 110 through 114, and for other purposes. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair, can I send him the 22nd on to speak to the bill?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition of the bill for many reasons, but specifically, I want to direct the attention to page 3, which is line 84 and 85, which specifically states, "It shall be a misdemeanor to attempt to use a driver's privilege card," which I guess now is driver's safety card, "for identification purposes other than presentment to a law enforcement officer." The issue there, Mr. President, is that basically makes this a strict liability offense. So a person who does, by accident or mistake, does bring out their card, as been mentioned before, to cash a check, rent an apartment, pick their kids up from school, taking the kids to the doctor, or any numerous reasons that a person may think that they have to bring out a card, would be then in violation of a misdemeanor offense. There is no intent to this at all. Certainly, and I believe listening to the senator from the 29th, the true intent of this bill is to stop persons from voting, stop persons from fraudulently voting, possibly stop any type of terrorist attacks to nuclear facilities, and those are noble reasons. But these two lines do not articulate those particular reasons. These two lines basically say for any particular reason with no intent at all. And then the key point becomes, who will actually enforce this? The persons who actually enforce this would be regular citizens. It would have to be the person at the store, the person at the apartment complex, who would actually be the ones enforcing. that is not completely unusual in our law. For instance, if you have a shoplifting case, it is the clerk that initially detains someone for shoplifting. If you have a theft case, you may detain somebody and call the police, of course, if you believe they stole your property. But implicit in both of those two laws, where you actually have private citizens many times who will be the persons who may actually initiate the criminal proceeding by actually detaining someone, in both of those laws, it has to be with the intent to steal. There has to be an intent to do an act. In other words, for our theft by shoplifting statute, for instance, concealment alone does not necessarily mean you're automatically guilty for shoplifting. It has to be concealment with the intent to steal. Objective facts that we can look at, and a layperson can make a determination about why they're stopping this person. Here, in this particular bill, there is no intent at all. The simple bringing out of this driver's safety card in of itself is a misdemeanor. It is not with an intent to fraud. It is not with an intent to do something nefarious. It is simply the act of bringing out the card. That is overreaching, and it puts a tremendous burden on our citizens, because it would truly be them who will have to enforce this. Because we already know that if it's presented to a law enforcement officer, that is perfectly fine. So the only persons who have the opportunity to enforce this will be regular citizens. And yet they'll be enforcing something that requires no intent at all of criminal conduct. And also, even to complicate it, we have on Section B, lines 90 through 93, where it is clear that this card will say it is only for driving. It is not for ID purposes. So if the person pulls it out, how can you make any logical conclusion that they were attempting to actually defraud or do something nefarious? Because the card that they're handing this person specifically states it's not for any purpose other than ID. So we have a crime here which may go to some serious issues. We don't want persons voting fraudulently. We don't want our nuclear facilities, as a senator that represents nuclear facility, we don't want those to be compromised, but this bill goes further than that. And to say, well, maybe the clerk at the store won't try to enforce it, that still puts them in that position to have to enforce it. So I think that the goal that we're talking about may be, and there's questions there, and we could debate that also, may be good, but this goes too far and is overreaching. And so, Mr. President, I'll yield the well unless there's any questions.
There are no questions.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 42nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 6. First of all, colleagues, this legislation, this driver's privilege, driver's safety card is unnecessary. It's already been stated by several of our colleagues that the current driver's license given to individuals who are legally here under deferred action does distinguish itself from the driver's license that the rest of us have. So to that sense, creating a whole other category of new card is not necessary. Secondly, the individuals that we are talking about are indeed legally present in the United States. So again, that calls to mind what is the purpose of doing this other than to stigmatize them, express the displeasure of some here in our chamber to the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, not something that the Senate should be spending a lot of time and energy on. Also, you know, I do want to make sure that all of our colleagues have seen this letter from the Secretary of State's office that does say that the current verification processes and procedures do not allow non-citizens to register to vote. It also says, if there were any doubt, if an applicant was not verified, the county would request additional information and the applicants who are not verified as citizens by the Department of Driver Services may not be registered as voters or vote without providing to the county in which they are registering additional verification that they are indeed citizens of the United States of America. We haven't heard any instances of actual voter fraud. The Secretary of State has confirmed that individuals here under deferred action with the limited term driver's license are not eligible to register to vote. That's a non-existent problem. So we're just creating an administrative burden, a new type of card for a non-existent problem. Also, it does bear repeating that not just individuals who are deferred action for childhood arrivals fall under the category of deferred action. It also includes individuals who have been victims of domestic violence, victims of crime, and individuals who are in the United States for humanitarian reasons. So we are also sweeping them up, and I'm not sure what the purpose is in sweeping them up into this legislation. As was just eloquently explained by the senator from the 22nd, it creates criminals. This legislation creates criminals out of people who may not know which card they're yanking out of their wallet. Who among us has not yanked out the wrong credit card, the wrong bill, a 10 versus a 20, your driver's license versus something else? It's going to be even easier for these individuals to pull out the wrong card because they're clearly going to have to carry even more pieces of identification than the rest of us would, who can get a driver's license, that are going to look similar but different from a driver's license. So it'll be even easier for them to yank out the wrong card. And as I say, who among us has not yanked out the wrong card before? And under this, we would make them criminals. I think that's a very unwise path to go down. No other state does this, and unfortunately, Senate Bill 6 just serves only to perpetuate the unfortunately mainstream message, especially during this presidential cycle, to immigrants and foreigners that they are not welcome, a message that is both morally wrong and extraordinarily economically damaging. Colleagues, that is a very dangerous and damaging reputation for our state to acquire, and I urge everyone to vote no against this unnecessary legislation. Mr. President, if there are no questions, I'll yield the well.
No questions.
Thank you.
All right, Chair recognizes Senator the 19th and then the 29th to close the debate. Okay, we'll read that.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was hoping that this bill wouldn't be back again this session. Unfortunately, I think Senator from the 5th had it right. It was a lot more about show than it is about substance. I'm also frustrated when people that have never hired anybody at all introduce legislation to I think put people in jeopardy. We've got a driver's license now that has enough language on it to distinguish that these people can't vote. Many of them already have this driver's license. They're not violating any laws, but now they have to have 2 documents, and if they pull the wrong one out, they may be guilty of, and show it to the wrong person, they may be guilty of a misdemeanor and be in trouble when they ordinarily wouldn't be. I guess this wouldn't mean so much to me, except I actually know some of these people. It's different when you know people. It's all right to talk about them as though they're nebulous. You know, they're just out there and they shouldn't be here. They're our neighbors, but I don't want them as my neighbor. I know these people. I've mentioned one named Abraham that works for me. Deferred action, he's the only child in his family that's not legal. He's the only child in his family that's not legal, and most of the rest of them work for me too, in my restaurant. Abraham has deferred action status, and he has a driver's license that has limited term on it. It's not like anybody else's driver's license that works for me. We know what that license means. He can't vote, etc. Abraham came to me as a dishwasher. He's worked 2 years for a dishwasher, did not miss a day, shows up every day, works hard, and then he got on the line where he actually is plating food. And then he got moved up to number 2 chef, and in my restaurant, number 2 chef is pretty good. We pay pretty good wage. He doesn't know I know all this about him, but I know the rest of his family they want him to be legal, but he's deferred action. That's just the way it is. Every restaurant in Georgia needs people to work. It is almost impossible to find good help. We just passed a $1 billion transportation bill. You know what the transportation community's biggest problem is? Labor. They work a lot of deferred action people that are now going to have to go get 2 other documents. Apparently, I can't even understand all of what the amendment does. I'm afraid of what some of it might do, but I do have a lot of the same concerns the senator from the 22nd had, that presenting the wrong document to the wrong person can be a misdemeanor when you're just trying to buy something at the store. Think about it. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because there's those in the hall that do not like brown people. Now, I wish that weren't so. But when the question came to the one who has all the answers and says, "Who is my neighbor?" Make it somebody that I don't have to like. The answer was not who they had to like. The answer was, let me show you how to be neighborly. And he used an illegal immigrant called a Samaritan half-breed to make his point that this is the guy that was being neighborly. Now, I'm just telling you, I'm not afraid of voting right. I don't care if it beats me or 10 people run against me. When a child comes here with their parent and their parent is the one who's done wrong and you want to blame them for it, you don't punish people for the sins of their parents. We have educated those people by federal law for the last 13 years. Abraham came here at 4 years old. He went all the way through school, but he can't go any further because he can't get state tuition. So he's made himself a very good employee, very quiet guy. Now, we've got a law in place. We've got a driver's license that identifies these people as being non-citizens. That's good enough, unless you want to make the department create a whole new set of rules, jeopardize these folks even more, and give employers more difficulty in finding somebody that actually can drive to work without getting a ticket. I know it's election year. I wished it wasn't an election year, but it doesn't matter. Election years come often. I hope you'll vote this bill down. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Chair, hold on. Have another amendment. Secretary will read.
Mr. President, Senators Bethel of the 54th and McCoon of the 29th offer the following amendment number 3 to Senate Bill 6 by inserting on line 84 after the word attempt the following with intent to deceive. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 29th to speak to the amendments and close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. At bottom, the purpose and intent of Senate Bill 6 is to reinforce a simple principle, the principle of the rule of law. That principle doesn't discriminate on the basis of race, and we've heard a lot of debate where essentially it's been implied that the motivation behind this is racist or bigoted in some way, and I suppose if it's a day in why, I shouldn't be surprised about that. But let me talk for just a moment about the substantive issues that were raised. First, it was said in the debate that no other state has done this. That is incorrect. The state of New Mexico passed a similar piece of legislation to establish a separate driver's card, and that was signed into law by Governor Martinez just a few weeks ago. It was said that there's been no voter registration issues. In fact, in North Carolina, when they were first moving in this direction, having this same debate, they wanted to go in the direction Senate Bill 6 goes in 2013. But they were ultimately persuaded to go in the direction that Georgia chose, to simply say limited term. A review comparing those names that had been issued driver's licenses and the voting rolls found that a couple of thousand people on that list of folks with driver's licenses were also on the voting rolls. So it's not a question of if, but when, and perhaps it's already happened. Much was made of the Secretary of State's letter. I think it's important to note that on January 29th, the Obama administration's EAC that oversees election procedure changes had signed off on citizenship verification in Kansas, here in Georgia, and other states. That office has been sued, and the Obama administration's Department of Justice has essentially said the plaintiffs are correct, that they should concede and enter into a consent order outlawing citizenship verification. And that's before a federal court right now. So the notion that first, the driver's license is in any way distinguishable is very hard to swallow. If you look at DDS's own presentations on this, they have a gigantic arrow pointing to the two tiny words limited term so that you can see the difference. I should also point out that the limited term driver's license is not exclusively issued to folks with no lawful status. It's issued to the business executive who comes in from another country. It's issued to the Kia executive, the Mercedes-Benz executive. There's no difference between the license that they are receiving and the license that these individuals with no lawful status are receiving. I think it's important that we reinforce the rule of law, and quite frankly, to listen to the debate, you would think we were talking about taking away driver's licenses from citizens or driver's licenses from individuals who are in the country with lawful status. All we are doing, I mean, we're taking the position, I don't know how many countries take this position that say, we know that you are in the country, that you have no lawful status to be here, but here's a government photo, driver's card. Go ahead, take it. Drive the roads. So it seems to me that if anything, we are erring on the side of being generous in making sure that these driver cards are available to people who have no lawful status to be in the country. Let me briefly go over the amendments. When I return to my desk, Mr. President, I'll be withdrawing Amendment 1. Amendment 2 simply clarifies we received some guidance from the Attorney General about the term lawful status versus alien lawful status, and you'll see a number of changes throughout the amendment that address that. We replace all the instances of driver's privilege card with driver's safety card. We replace deferred action with deferred action on deportation. The legend on the card itself, we provide a vertical orientation, and we add the term not applicable for official purposes. And the rest of the changes are consistent with what I've already mentioned. I will say, in terms of the vertical orientation and these other changes, why do we want it to be distinguishable? It's the same reason that we make driver's licenses that are issued to individuals under the age of 21 distinguishable. It's a different status. It's a different legal status. It's to say to law enforcement and others, we are dealing with folks who have a different status under the law so that the law can be properly enforced. Amendment 3, in reference to some of the concerns brought up in the debate regarding a strict liability criminal offense, we insert on line 84 after the word attempt the following, which is with intent to deceive, so that that's an element of proof there, which I think addresses that issue that was brought up in the debate. So I would urge adoption of Amendment 2, adoption of Amendment 3, and then adoption of the committee substitute with those amendments. I thank the Senate for its patience and indulgence as we move forward on providing meaningful protection for public safety, voter integrity, and the rule of law in our state. Thank you, Mr. President.